lied and used fake documents to obtain the interview with my mother. It is my view that the deceitful way the interview was obtained substantially influenced what my mother said. The interview was a major contribution to making my parents' relationship worse and has since hurt countless others.
William's very first day as king reportedly sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace, with some insiders claiming it marked the beginning of a royal reset nobody saw coming. As whispers spread through palace corridors, attention quickly turned to Camilla's family, who suddenly found themselves at the center of growing speculation. Were William's earliest decisions simply routine steps of a new monarch, or a deliberate signal that old influence would no longer carry the same weight? Public reaction has been divided, and questions continue to mount. What really happened behind palace doors that day? So what do you think? Was William sending a powerful message from day one? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more royal stories. The first royal shock. The moment Prince William stepped into his new role as king, something felt different. The atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace was not defined by celebration alone. Instead, a quiet sense of anticipation spread through corridors, offices, and reception rooms as staff, advisors, and royal observers watched closely for signs of what kind of monarch he intended to become. Many expected a careful continuation of existing traditions. What unfolded instead sparked immediate discussion and raised questions about whether a significant shift had already begun. From the earliest hours, palace insiders reportedly noticed a different tone. William appeared focused, deliberate, and unusually direct. There was little interest in unnecessary display and little effort to draw attention to ceremonial grandeur. Rather than emphasizing spectacle, he seemed determined to project purpose. Every appearance, every movement, and every decision attracted scrutiny because they appeared to signal a leader who had already formed a clear vision long before the crown officially reached him. That impression did not emerge without context. For years, William had gradually assumed greater responsibility within the monarchy. As King Charles faced health challenges and reduced public duties, William increasingly stepped into important roles. By the time he became king, many believed he was already carrying much of the institution's daily weight. Yet seeing that authority fully displayed created a different impact. What had once been preparation now looked like execution. Inside the palace, conversations quickly turned toward what these early signals might mean. Some interpreted William's approach as evidence of confidence and readiness. Others wondered whether it reflected a broader plan to reshape how influence operated within royal circles. The absence of excessive ceremony was viewed by some as a practical choice. To others, it looked like a message. The uncertainty surrounding those interpretations only fueled further speculation. Attention soon shifted toward Queen Camilla's family. For years, their presence around royal events and private gatherings had become familiar. Under King Charles, those relationships appeared secure. Now, however, observers began questioning whether old assumptions still applied. Nothing dramatic was said publicly, and no official announcement explained any change. Yet the mood surrounding the transition seemed noticeably different. Familiar expectations suddenly felt less certain than before. That growing uncertainty became one of the most discussed aspects of William's first day. Palace staff reportedly sensed that influence would no longer be measured solely by history, personal relationships, or established routines. Instead, there appeared to be a stronger focus on structure, purpose, and future priorities. Whether that perception was entirely accurate remained open to debate, but the impression itself carried weight. By the end of those first hours, one conclusion seemed difficult to ignore. William's arrival as king had generated surprise not because of a dramatic public declaration, but because of the quiet signals surrounding his actions. They hinted at a monarchy entering a new phase. Exactly how far that transformation might reach remained unclear, leaving palace insiders watching carefully for what would happen next. The real consequences were only beginning then. Yet the palace unease was only beginning. Which private decision left insiders stunned? Why were long-standing expectations suddenly collapsing? And as tensions quietly rose behind closed doors, who stood to lose the most from William's next move? Stay with us. No time for tradition. The surprise surrounding William's first day as king did not end with his public appearance. If anything, the deeper story began after the cameras shifted away from the palace gates and attention turned toward what was happening behind closed doors inside Buckingham Palace. While many expected a period of adjustment, William appeared determined to move immediately. There was little sign of a monarch easing into the role. Instead, his earliest actions suggested that important plans had already been prepared long before the crown officially became his. As palace officials settled into the reality of a new reign, meetings reportedly began taking shape almost immediately. Senior advisors, trusted aides, and key members of the royal household found themselves reviewing priorities that would help define the direction of the monarchy. The atmosphere was described less as ceremonial and more as operational. Rather than focusing on symbolism alone, attention seemed fixed on structure, organization, and future objectives. For many observers, that distinction mattered. William had spent years gradually taking on greater responsibility as King Charles faced health challenges and reduced public duties. During that period, he became increasingly familiar with the inner workings of the institution. Because of that experience, some palace insiders believed he entered the throne with a clearer understanding of what needed attention. What surprised many was the speed with which those priorities appeared to move forward. Within royal circles, discussions reportedly centered on efficiency. The focus was not on creating dramatic changes for public display, but on examining how the monarchy operated behind the scenes. Long-standing arrangements, working practices, and internal structures were viewed through a different lens. Some interpreted this approach as evidence of strong leadership and preparation. Others questioned whether such urgency signaled a broader effort to reshape the balance of influence within the palace itself. As word of these developments spread quietly through royal corridors, senior aides began noticing a leadership style that differed from what many had grown accustomed to. William appeared less interested in preserving routines simply because they existed, and more interested in whether they continued to serve a purpose. That perspective created curiosity, but it also generated uncertainty. Whenever a new leader reviews established systems, questions naturally follow about who benefits and who may lose influence. Those questions became especially relevant among individuals connected to previous arrangements. For years, certain relationships and expectations had developed under King Charles. Familiar patterns had become part of palace life. Now, however, there were growing signs that assumptions based on the past might not automatically carry forward into the future. No official conflict emerged, and no public disagreement was announced, yet the mood inside royal circles appeared noticeably cautious. Some observers argued that William was simply doing what any responsible monarch would do during a transition. Others suspected something larger was unfolding beneath the surface. Was this merely an effort to improve efficiency, or was it the first stage of a wider transformation? The answer remained unclear. What became increasingly difficult to ignore, however, was that the shock surrounding William's first day was no longer limited to symbolism. It was becoming operational, deliberate, and deeply connected to how power itself might function in the years ahead. But if William was moving this fast behind closed doors, who was feeling the pressure first? Which long-standing arrangements suddenly seemed vulnerable? And what unexpected decision was already beginning to unsettle the palace even further? Stay glued. Silence spreads through familiar circles. As the first hours of William's reign unfolded, attention gradually shifted away from the new king himself and toward those who had long occupied influential positions around the monarchy. Inside Buckingham Palace, conversations were no longer focused solely on what William was doing. Increasingly, they centered on who might be affected by the direction he appeared determined to take. Among the most closely watched figures was Queen Camilla's wider family, whose place within royal circles had grown familiar during King Charles's reign. For years, Camilla's relatives had enjoyed a level of visibility that naturally came with her rise within the royal household. Their presence at certain events, private gatherings, and important occasions had become part of the wider royal landscape. Under King Charles, those connections appeared stable and rarely attracted significant attention. However, William's arrival as king suddenly caused observers to view those relationships through a different lens. Questions that had once seemed unnecessary began surfacing almost immediately. Within palace corridors, uncertainty replaced assumptions. No public announcement suggested any dramatic change, and no official statement indicated that anyone was being pushed aside. Yet the atmosphere surrounding the transition created growing curiosity. Many wondered whether the priorities of the new king would naturally lead to a different approach regarding influence, representation, and access within the royal institution. Members of Camilla's extended circle reportedly found themselves at the center of this quiet speculation. What once appeared secure now seemed less predictable. Invitations, visibility, and proximity to key royal activities suddenly became topics of discussion among palace observers. The issue was not necessarily what had happened, but what might happen next. In an environment where symbolism often carries as much weight as formal decisions, uncertainty itself became a powerful force. The situation was made more significant by William's broader reputation. Throughout the years leading up to his accession, he had increasingly been associated with modernization, efficiency, and a more streamlined vision for the monarchy. As a result, some observers believed his reign could bring a reassessment of long-established arrangements. Others argued that such interpretations were premature, insisting that normal transitions often generate unnecessary speculation before new patterns become clear. Even so, the questions persisted. If William intended to reshape certain aspects of royal life, where would those changes begin? Would familiar relationships continue exactly as before, or would new priorities gradually alter the balance of influence? No clear answers emerged, leaving room for competing interpretations. Supporters of continuity saw little evidence of disruption. Those expecting reform viewed the early signs as impossible to ignore. What made the situation especially intriguing was the absence of open conflict. There were no public confrontations, no dramatic statements, and no visible disputes. Instead, concern appeared to spread through silence. Confidence that once came from established connections seemed harder to maintain in a period defined by uncertainty. The shift was subtle but noticeable. By the end of those early days, one reality had become increasingly clear. William's accession was prompting people to reconsider assumptions that had existed for years. Whether those concerns would ultimately prove justified remained unknown. Yet the growing attention on Camilla's wider circle revealed something important about the changing atmosphere inside the palace. As power adjusted to a new center, even long-standing certainty suddenly felt open to question and debate. Could William's next move quietly redraw the palace hierarchy? Who stands to lose influence and who gains unexpected ground? As confidence begins to fade behind closed doors, an unfolding development threatens to change everything, and nobody appears prepared for it. Let's find out. The plan, hidden in plain. As questions continued to spread through Buckingham Palace, a new possibility began gaining attention. What if the events of William's first day as king were not sudden decisions at all? What if the calm confidence, the swift reviews, and the immediate focus on priorities had been years in the making? The more closely observers examined the situation, the harder it became to dismiss that possibility. What initially looked like a surprising shift now appeared increasingly connected to a much longer story. Long before William formally became king, signs of his future direction had already emerged. Over the years, he had gradually taken on greater responsibility within the monarchy, particularly as King Charles faced health challenges that limited parts of his public workload. During that period, William was not simply representing the crown at events. He was also gaining first-hand experience of how the institution operated behind closed doors. Those experiences appeared to shape his understanding of what worked, what needed improvement, and what kind of monarchy he wanted to lead. As his responsibilities expanded, reports frequently suggested that William favored a more focused and efficient royal structure. Rather than emphasizing size and ceremony, he seemed increasingly interested in effectiveness and public value. At the time, those ideas were often discussed as future possibilities. However, once he became king, many observers began connecting his early decisions to those long-standing views. Suddenly, actions that seemed surprising on the surface looked more like the implementation of a plan that had been developing quietly for years. Previous disagreements inside royal circles also attracted renewed attention. While rarely discussed openly, differences in approach had occasionally surfaced between William and other senior figures within the monarchy. Questions surrounding royal responsibilities, public perception, and institutional priorities had revealed contrasting viewpoints. These moments were often treated as isolated issues at the time. Yet viewed through the lens of William's accession, they appeared to offer early clues about the direction he ultimately intended to take. King Charles's illness became another important part of that picture. As William stepped into a larger leadership role during that period, he gained practical experience managing challenges that demanded careful judgment and long-term thinking. Those circumstances may have accelerated preparations that otherwise would have unfolded more gradually. Rather than waiting for a future transition, William was already confronting many of the realities associated with leadership. By the time the crown passed to him, he appeared ready to move forward with unusual certainty. Inside Buckingham Palace, interpretations of these developments varied. Some believed William was simply demonstrating preparedness and responsibility. Others suspected the emergence of a broader governing philosophy that would gradually reshape how influence and authority functioned within the royal household. Supporters viewed this approach as necessary modernization. Critics questioned whether efficiency might come at the expense of long-established traditions and relationships. The debate itself revealed how significant the moment had become. What originally seemed like a collection of first-day decisions was increasingly viewed as evidence of something larger. William's actions no longer looked impulsive or reactive. Instead, they suggested the arrival of a carefully considered vision built over many years. As that realization spread through palace circles, the focus shifted from what William had already done to what he might do next. That uncertainty would continue to shape every conversation that followed. But if this plan was years in the making, who helped shape it behind palace walls? Which moment changed everything? And why are insiders now fearing the next phase could transform the monarchy forever? Keep watching. Behind every crown stands Catherine. As discussions about William's first day as king continued to spread through Buckingham Palace, attention gradually turned toward a figure who had remained largely in the background of the transition, yet seemed impossible to ignore. While much of the public focus centered on William's decisions, palace insiders increasingly pointed to Catherine as a significant force behind the stability and direction of the new reign. Her presence was rarely dramatic, but that was precisely what made it so influential. At a moment filled with uncertainty, she appeared to represent consistency, preparation, and calm. For years, Catherine had carefully built a reputation that differed from many senior royal figures. Rather than seeking attention through controversy or spectacle, she became known for discipline, patience, and a measured approach to public duty. Those qualities helped establish a level of public trust that grew steadily over time. As William moved closer to the throne, many observers began viewing Catherine not simply as his wife, but as an essential partner in the future of the monarchy. Inside royal circles, that perception became increasingly important. The transition to a new reign required more than a king assuming authority. It also required stability at the center of the institution. Catherine's role appeared to provide exactly that. While William focused on shaping priorities and guiding the monarchy forward, she projected reassurance during a period of significant change. Together, they presented an image of continuity, balanced with renewal, something many believed would be critical for maintaining public confidence. As palace observers examined the early signs of William's reign, a pattern began to emerge. The goals associated with William's vision for a more focused and modern monarchy appeared closely aligned with Catherine's long-standing approach to royal life. Both had often emphasized meaningful public engagement over unnecessary spectacle. Both seemed committed to balancing tradition with relevance. Because of this shared outlook, many insiders viewed their leadership style as coordinated rather than separate. That perception carried important implications. If William's first decisions reflected a carefully developed strategy, then Catherine's influence could not easily be dismissed as secondary. Some observers believe she played a key role in helping shape the environment that made those decisions possible. Others argued that her greatest contribution was less about direct influence and more about creating stability around the future king. Either interpretation pointed toward the same conclusion. Her importance within the monarchy was growing. As this understanding spread, comparisons with previous royal dynamics became unavoidable. The conversation was no longer focused solely on individual personalities. Instead, it increasingly centered on how power and influence might function under the new reign. Palace insiders often described William and Catherine as operating with a shared sense of purpose, approaching challenges as a partnership rather than separate figures pursuing different goals. That image only strengthened as William's first days unfolded. At a time when many were questioning how the monarchy would evolve, the couple projected unity, preparation, and control. For supporters, this signaled strength. For others, it raised questions about how much influence the partnership might ultimately wield. Whatever the answer, one reality was becoming difficult to overlook. William's agenda did not appear to stand alone. Behind the new king stood a trusted ally whose growing influence was quietly helping define the future direction of the crown itself. Yet even as Catherine's influence expands, unsettling questions begin to emerge. How much of William's strategy bears her imprint? Which decisions are being shaped behind closed doors? And why are palace insiders suddenly watching their partnership more closely? Let's unravel the details. The palace begins changing shape. What began as a series of subtle signals during William's first day as king was now producing effects that could be felt throughout the royal household. The early decisions that had sparked curiosity inside Buckingham Palace were no longer being viewed as symbolic gestures alone. Increasingly, they appeared connected to practical changes that touched the daily operation of the monarchy. For many observers, this was the moment when speculation started turning into visible reality. Behind palace walls, attention focused on how existing structures would function under the new reign. William's emphasis on purpose, efficiency, and modernization had already become a topic of discussion. Now, those principles seemed to be influencing the way royal operations were being evaluated. Departments, responsibilities, and long-standing arrangements were reportedly examined with fresh eyes. The objective did not appear to be change for its own sake, but rather a review of whether existing systems continued to serve the goals of a modern monarchy. As these assessments unfolded, questions naturally emerged about future roles within the institution. Individuals who had grown accustomed to certain positions and levels of influence found themselves facing a period of uncertainty. No dramatic announcements were made, and no public controversy erupted. Yet the atmosphere inside royal circles suggested that familiar assumptions could no longer be taken for granted. In a system built on tradition, even small adjustments carried significant meaning. The effects extended beyond internal administration. Observers began paying closer attention to public appearances, invitations, and representation at official events. These details often reveal how influence operates within royal life, and many wondered whether William's priorities would gradually reshape those patterns. Decisions about who would be seen, who would attend key engagements, and who would represent the crown in different settings suddenly attracted greater scrutiny than before. For some palace insiders, these developments reflected a logical evolution. William had long been associated with a vision of a more focused monarchy, one that emphasized effectiveness and public service. From that perspective, reviewing roles and responsibilities was a necessary part of ensuring the institution remained relevant. Supporters argued that accountability and public value should guide decision-making, particularly at a time when the monarchy faced increasing expectations from both the public and the media. Others viewed the situation differently. They questioned whether a stronger focus on efficiency might reduce the importance of relationships and traditions that had shaped royal life for generations. Some wondered whether established networks of influence would gradually lose their place within the institution. While no evidence suggested immediate upheaval, the uncertainty itself became a source of tension. People were not reacting to confirmed outcomes. They were reacting to the possibility of change. That possibility grew more difficult to ignore with each passing day. The more William's priorities became visible, the clearer it seemed that old systems might not automatically survive unchanged. Whether those systems would be reformed, reduced, or simply adapted remained unknown. Yet the expectation of continuity that once surrounded the transition was beginning to fade. By this stage, the significance of William's first-day message was becoming impossible to dismiss. What started as a shift in tone was evolving into a broader reassessment of how the monarchy operated. The palace was not experiencing a sudden revolution, but it was clearly entering a period of adjustment. The question was no longer whether change was coming. The real question was how far that change would ultimately reach. But who stands to gain from these sweeping changes? Which royal figures may soon face unexpected consequences? And as long-standing traditions quietly disappear, what revelation is waiting behind the palace doors that could change everything? A crown redefined in silence. By the end of William's first day as king, the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace had settled into something far more complex than simple adjustment. What began as a series of quiet but striking decisions had now evolved into a broader sense of direction that could be felt across multiple royal households. The early shock that had greeted his accession was no longer about isolated actions. Instead, it was about what those actions appeared to represent, a new framework for how the monarchy might operate going forward. Within royal circles, reactions varied, but a common theme quickly emerged. There was recognition that this reign would likely be shaped by discipline, structure, and a stronger focus on modern expectations. William's approach, as observed on his first day, suggested a preference for clarity over tradition when the two came into conflict. For those who had long been accustomed to established patterns of influence, this shift created both attention and uncertainty. The sense that inherited position alone might no longer guarantee stability became increasingly difficult to ignore. Across different parts of the royal household, conversations quietly reflected this changing reality. Some viewed the new direction as a necessary evolution for an institution under constant public scrutiny. Others saw it as a departure from the softer relationship-based style that had defined previous eras. Neither interpretation was officially confirmed, yet both circulated widely enough to shape expectations. In this environment, even silence carried meaning, and the absence of clear statements only deepened curiosity. Attention inevitably turned toward Queen Camilla's family, whose position within royal life had been shaped over many years through proximity, familiarity, and established connection. Under King Charles, those relationships had developed within a stable framework. Now, however, observers began to question how those dynamics might function under a different style of leadership. No direct action was publicly announced, but the perception of change was enough to create speculation about future roles and visibility. At the same time, William's broader vision for the monarchy began to take clearer form in the way his first day was interpreted. Reports of his early focus on efficiency and structured decision-making contributed to a growing belief that he intended to reshape how the institution presented itself both internally and publicly. Supporters of this direction argued that such clarity was essential for long-term relevance. Critics, however, wondered whether a stronger emphasis on modernization might unintentionally reduce space for long-standing relationships and traditions that had supported the monarchy for decades. What made this moment especially significant was not a single dramatic announcement, but the accumulation of subtle signals. Together they created the impression that the monarchy was entering a new phase defined less by inheritance alone and more by purpose and performance. That shift, whether fully intended or gradually emerging, became the central point of discussion among palace observers. By the end of the day, one conclusion stood out across all interpretations. William's first moments as king had not only surprised those within the palace, they had also set a tone that would likely influence every decision that followed. The monarchy had not yet been transformed, but its direction had clearly been marked. What remained uncertain was how deeply that new order would ultimately reach, and how those closest to the institution would adapt as it continued to unfold. So, what do you think? Did William's first day as king signal a bold new era or a silent power takeover that stunned the palace and Camilla's family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.